You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Welcome to Arcane Carolinas. Blah! I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I'm your co-host, award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams, and I definitely do not sleep in a coffin.
So today's topic is going to be the vampires of Dillsboro.
I was just going to say, I'm so excited to talk about this because I have no idea what this story is, but I love vampires. They're my favorite monster.
It is going to take us a minute to get to that story because Dillsboro, North Carolina is rich with a combination of fun history, tragic history, strange history. It's an interesting little town.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into all that, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to our Patreon backers. Without them, we would not be doing this many episodes this fall. This episode is part of our fall 2021 lineup. If you like our show, please consider leaving us a rating on whatever app you use to listen. I'm getting used to saying that because we're totally not just recording all of these in a row months before release.
We definitely are.
So, Dillsboro, North Carolina is in Jackson County, North Carolina, the trout capital of North Carolina.
The trout capital?
Yeah, like the fish.
Yeah. And do they have a fun trout festival or anything?
They do have cool stencils on the sidewalk. I don't know about the trout festival, but it's a nice little town. I'll start off by plugging local businesses. Dillsboro Chocolate Factory is in downtown Dillsboro. Really cool little shop. You can get everything from off-the-shelf candy you know and love to handcrafted specialty items that they make right there in the store, and they are delicious.
Wow, nice.
Smells great. They have a really cool map on the wall with little pins with all different colored pinheads, and people put in a pin where they're from. And I'm going to include a picture of this in a gallery on Facebook. And you can see that people from all over the country have visited this shop. Kind of neat.
That's awesome. Wow, that's cool.
And a stone's throw down the road is Farmhouse Coffee in Sylva, North Carolina. And we're going to get to the relationship between Sylva and Dillsboro at some point in this episode. I mean, you could probably ride a bike to it from Dillsboro right down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and include them and say that Farmhouse Coffee in Sylva, North Carolina has great staff, very kind, incredibly smooth coffee. I drink my coffee black. My wife does not. She orders very, very complicated beverages that involve the word lavender.
See, when it comes to coffee, I'm a little more on that end. Yeah.
And they were able to accommodate her with some strange liquid that ended in the word milk that was not milk. And lavender and espresso. And they took care of her. And she said hers was very good. I can attest that the regular old drip coffee is very smooth, very good, and the staff are very kind. Farmhouse Coffee, Sylva, North Carolina. So I took a little trip, kind of like I did with Bath, to Dillsboro for this episode.
Yeah, I want to hear what it was like. I've never been to Dillsboro.
Well, let's do the history of Jackson County and Dillsboro first, and that'll kind of give you a feel for historical context, and then I can tell you what it's like these days.
Sure.
So, history of Jackson County, North Carolina. It was originally part of the Cherokee Nation. The descendants that remained in the area form most of the federally recognized Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which is the only tribe in North Carolina to have that status.
Yeah, they're very unique in that regard.
The European American population increased very slowly in this part of the state. It was, and in some degree still is, fairly isolated. It's very, very mountainous.
Yeah.
So getting around and farming and all that would not have been easy for settlers. In fact, Jackson County was not even organized until 1851.
Wow. That's pretty late.
Yeah, it was created from parts of Haywood and Macon.
Mm-hmm.
And it was named after Andrew Jackson, like President Andrew Jackson.
Right. I was going to say part of the difficulty that people had turning that part of the state into farms is that literally in the Appalachians at the time, the trees were so large, it was difficult to cut them down.
Right. You get those really cool old timey photos with like a couple of people standing around with giant saws and giant trees and Guinness Book of World Records looking trees.
Yeah.
So Dillsboro itself in Jackson County was founded when the Murphy branch of the Western North Carolina Railroad came to the area in the 1880s. So pretty late. In 1882, they got their first post office. It was called the Tunnel Post Office, named after the Cowie Tunnel, which goes through a mountain right there in Dillsboro.
Okay.
And that is actually the subject of an alleged haunting that I'm going to get to in a minute, because you can't mention Dillsboro and not mention that story.
Okay.
So prior to being Dillsboro, like formally becoming Dillsboro and getting a post office, the unincorporated village had been called Depot or New Webster or Webster Station until the state legislature said you actually have to name this something. Because it was a railroad stop. Like, yeah, it is a town that popped up because the railroad was coming through. And the Murphy branch was the final stretch, actually. The end of the Western North Carolina rail line ended in Murphy. Mm-hmm. So final stretch, town pops up in 1889, named Dillsboro after William Allen Dills, who is credited as having established the place.
Okay.
And his daughter, Gertrude, was actually the first woman elected to the North Carolina State Senate.
Oh, well, there you go. Congratulations to her.
People of influence. I found a book that I really like. It's from 1905. It's written by a guy named Henry Gannett, and it's freely available under Creative Commons just because of how old it is.
Mm-hmm.
That book is titled The Origin of Certain Place Names in the United States. And it is so delightful. It is alphabetically sorted, just names of towns from all across the country, and then one sentence as to how they got their name.
So it's kind of like a phone book for town foundings.
Yeah. Now that book says that the town is named after someone named George W. Dill.
Okay.
But no one else has that except this one book.
Are you suggesting in the process of producing a massive tome on the foundings of the extremely compressed foundings of every town in America, he maybe didn't pay too much attention to details?
Somebody didn't. So, but just in case George Dill's descendants are out there fighting that good fight to get their name remembered, I'll go ahead and toss that out there.
I just imagine that this dude hired somebody to be the fact checker for his book of the history of town names. And the fact checker was like, did the check clear? Okay, yeah, they're good.
Look, it's massive. And it's just A to Z. No organization by state. Just look up a town name. Oh, yeah, I named that after a raccoon that got into the trash one night.
Does it like differentiate between all the different Lafayette's and Fayettevilles and, et cetera?
Right. You can't. There's just so many. So it tries to do that. It does try to do that. And it will list alphabetically by town name, the name of the town, comma, the state, and then the history like that. So
okay.
If there are duplicates, they do acknowledge that. So again, to drive home, this was very much a supply depot in the early days before growing into a proper town on the frontier, so to speak. One of the oldest buildings in town, to give you a sense of this, one of the oldest buildings in town dates to the 1870s.
Okay.
It's still there. It's a barber shop. You can get your hair cut in it. It's a small one floor, like shotgun shack on Front Street. In a relatively short amount of time, as with most boom towns, things sort of exploded. And by 1888, I found a source that said that they had 2 sawmills, 2 clay mines, a corundum crushing plant, and I had to look up what that is. I didn't know what that was. It's a crystalline form of aluminum oxide, like a rock.
Yeah.
So you like crush that up for metal powder. They had a lumber mill, 2 livery stables, 6 general stores.
Wow.
So again, it's a boom town. Like it's a railroad depot town. And they did have, for the time, a very large hotel, which is still there and really cool looking, called the Jarrett House. It's You know the balconies in New Orleans with like the wrought iron and
Yeah.
stuff?
Hmm.
It kind of looks like that. It kind of looks like that.
Okay.
Like classic Southern Railroad hotel.
Yeah. That sounds fantastic.
It looks like it's currently undergoing some renovations. I guess there were some tax problems and the property was forfeited and there's new owners coming in, but it's still there.
Hmm.
It was not open when I went through town. Looked really neat. I'll put a picture of it on the Facebook album.
Yeah. My sincere hope is that whoever has it will finish restoring it then.
Yeah. There was also a shoemaker,
You got to have shoes.
cobbler.
Yeah.
gotta walk around.
Lumber was a massive industry in that part of the state. One side of my family includes people who worked in lumber at the time. And I mean, they were the people operating the chainsaws and having trees fall on them. So, it was, yeah, not a lot of workplace safety around back then. But OSHA, I don't think, was a big force in the lumber industry in Western North Carolina. But there were a ton of towns that would, like that, just instantly mushroom, like spring into being overnight. The lumber industry would strip the mountains of all the trees and then fire everybody and leave.
Yep.
And so it was very, very difficult times for people and for the land.
And that is not unique, actually, to North Carolina. That is pretty common story during this era.
Yeah.
So right down the road, I mentioned the town of Silva, and it's worth mentioning the town of Silva because it is the county seat for Jackson County, and they had a real Shelbyville and Springfield relationship.
Oh.
To make a Simpsons reference, there was a rivalry between Silva and Dillsboro in the early days. The efforts, like they'd be like, "We got a sawmill, well, we got two," because it's also on the rail line, right?
Yeah.
So it's a direct competitor for commerce, for settlers. It's pretty funny, actually, how close they are, that there were two distinct towns trying to duke it out. Very, very much alike. But then a flood hit in 1894 and washed out the Blue Ridge Lumber Company in Dillsboro. And then two additional floods wiped out construction that had been going on for a cannery in Dillsboro. And the owner of that facility said, "All right, I'm done. The river keeps flooding. I'm going to go upstream to Silva." And the factory jobs and production jobs sort of started to migrate to Silva. And the factory, actually, the tannery facility is still there in Silva, though now it is a paper plant.
Mm-hmm.
So Dillsboro's population began to decline, mostly due to no additional housing being built inside the town limits. Houses that were houses, as the economy shifted, became shops. It became somewhat of like a tourist spot, I guess you could say. And that's that's kind of how it sits now. I will say that it is funny to me that in 1975, a write-in for mayor named Wade Wilson, like Deadpool.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that name is familiar.
Wade Wilson became mayor, and he went by Wade. His given first name was Walter. His middle name was Wade, but he went by Wade.
Mm-hmm.
This fella was a big Dillsboro guy and made a successful effort to restore a bunch of old buildings to their original, like, historical appearance, and really leaned into, like, we have something here, we can preserve this, we can make a go of this town, like we don't have to just fall into disrepair. And the town generally acknowledges his contributions as being a really good guy.
Oh, that's cool.
They're actually really big on that. A lot of love has gone into the town of Dillsboro. There are several plaques, like the donors of this effort made this park happen. There's a really nice park right on the water if you have kids, and it got a big playground and stuff like that. They like to acknowledge the work that has gone into keeping it nice. In 2012, the Dillsboro Dam and Powerhouse were demolished in an effort to conserve and restore the Tuckasegee River's ecosystem.
Yeah,
make it more of like a natural ecosystem, which is kind of cool. I honestly found it to be a absolutely lovely mountain town. A lot of good hiking nearby, fishing, tubing if you're into floating down the river. Great scenery. It's also home to a website called Skyships Over Cashiers that tracks UFO activity.
I have read Skyships Over Cashiers.
Yeah, so Cashiers is a town like 40 minutes south of Dillsboro, but their PO box, if you have a hot tip to send in, is in Dillsboro at the Dillsboro post office.
Fascinating.
Apparently, there was a widely reported UFO sighting in 2012 where the object moved from Cashiers to Silva to Dillsboro, like along that corridor, and many witnesses observed it. I won't steal it. I mean, that could probably be its own full episode, so I'm not going to go too much into that.
Yeah.
But that is how I found the website and database based out of Dillsboro. So I mentioned while we're still on things in Dillsboro, I mentioned the Cowie Tunnel.
Yeah.
Earlier. That's a really big landmark. You cannot talk about Dillsboro without talking about the tunnel. And unfortunately, that is home to an absolute tragedy. How many people, and sorry to spring questions on you, but
go for it.
Quiz time, lightning round. How many people do you think have died in the construction of the rail systems in North America?
In North America?
Like in the U.S., I'll say. Well, let's narrow it down. We'll say, forget Canada, just U.S.
I'm gonna go big and say 10,000.
The actual number is unknown due to shallow, unmarked, and untracked worker graves from the Industrial Revolution era.
Oh, God. Oof.
Chinese immigrants and Irish immigrants were not always tracked. So on the East Coast, you had the Irish immigrants. On the West Coast, you had the Chinese immigrant labor.
Yeah. Because
slaves were valuable.
Yeah.
And a lot of people died. So they're just like, we'll just pay these guys a cent a day and, give them some chili at the end of the day and hope they don't die.
Yeah, there's a lot of really shady stuff, to say the least.
So
really intense abusive practices.
They don't know how many people died. There are estimates, but certain ethnicity deaths were not tracked by the companies. People would just fall off the books. Did they quit? Did they die? Who knows? And, there were many mass graves along railroad lines. But then the Civil War happened. And, as different groups find their places in society, then no longer have to complete that work, it became much, much cheaper for railroad companies to lease human beings from states as chain gangs.
Yeah.
And that was a very common practice. Offenders with charges that could range from theft to murder could be conscripted into a chain gang and just like tossed together. And, they would work on the railroad for ridiculously cheap prices. Convict labor was used prominently throughout the construction of the Western North Carolina Railroad from the Blue Ridge Mountains east of Asheville to where it ended in Murphy. Specifically, that railroad used a lot of convict labor. Now, it was reported in the Raleigh News and Observer on January 3rd, 1883. So again, 1883, the town, what did I say? It was like 1880 or something. It started to mushroom up. So they were working on the Cowie Tunnel. So there was a mountain. The railroad's got to get through it. They were using chain gang labor. The camp where they would stay at night when they weren't working was on one side of the river. The construction site was on the opposite side of the river. And they had like a cable across, like affixed to trees, and they would all get on a barge and pull the boat across the river to go to the construction site. Apparently, there had been a big snowfall and the river was very high. So the water is high. There's water pooling on the barge, and they get about halfway through the river. And some stories say that one end of the boat dipped into the river and it began to fill with water. Another one said, the News and Observer one said that what happened was that there was just pooled water in the boat and people got scared. Regardless of what the motivation was, the group of people chained together began to freak out and rushed to one end, which caused it to capsize.
Oof.
And they went in.
Gosh.
All chained together. So even if you could swim, you have 17 other people affixed to you with shackles.
Right.
Dragging you down.
Yeah. They are not a chain gang of synchronized swimmers.
That's jinx. That's exactly what I was thinking.
There you go.
One guy was of large stature and the shackles would not fit on him. He jumped. So he got to the side. He jumped back in to save a guard, actually, and pulled the guard out. Several other prisoners that weren't chained up washed downriver and survived. So there's lots of surviving witnesses and, credible people to vouch for this. Unfortunately, though, 18 men drowned in the river that day.
Gosh.
And then their bodies were recovered when the river was a little bit lower, and they were buried in a unmarked mass grave nearby. Nothing changed.
Wow. Gosh.
Post-industrial revolution, post-Civil War, still doing that with railroad workers.
Yeah.
Now, there's a rumor that they were buried on top of the mountain, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Because why? I have been there. I have seen the mountain. Why would you hike up the mountain to bury these people?
Right. And carry 18 bodies and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, there's one account that I found online of a woman that lives in a house along the river that claims that the bodies are buried in her backyard. And this was verified using dowsing rods.
Okay. I mean, I grew up in the mountains and I believe in dowsing. So,
But no site has ever been definitively confirmed and located, despite efforts to do just that. So a couple of years ago, there was a big push to, we need to find these people. We know that they died. This was widely reported, reputable sources. It's been memorialized in folk music and recorded, and they couldn't find them.
Oh.
So to this day, there is no marker. Everybody knows the story, but there's no marker.
Yeah.
So it's said that there is constant moisture in the tunnel because the tears of the deceased that drowned will not let it be dry.
Oh, that's creepy.
It is said that cave-ins began occurring after the deaths due to a curse on the tunnel. I found a couple sources that were like, and there's been accidents with trains. I actually couldn't verify that. I could verify that there were cave-ins and moisture in the tunnel. It's been very, like I said, this is all very well documented stuff. Being someone that has explored a lot of tunnels and enjoys exploring on railroad tracks, there's almost always moisture in tunnels.
Yes, but
it's a nice story.
Yeah. And if I were in the process of being dragged to a certain death because I was on a chain gang that had been, for whatever stupid reason, chained together, shoved on a boat, and then allowed to die in a river, I would definitely hex the people responsible for it on my way down.
So I want to say very clearly that you are trespassing if you go to the tunnel. I am not advocating trespassing. However, I will also give some details about how not to get there.
Please share.
So on the downtown Hillsboro side of the river, there's railroad tracks, and they run into a rail depot yard, which has some really cool old train cars and stuff like that. They have stuff from the movie The Fugitive, actually set pieces from the movie The Fugitive. They filmed some scenes there.
Yeah, a bunch of The Fugitive was filmed up the mountains.
And they love it. There's even a Fugitive Run Road.
Oh, nice.
Which is kind of funny. So yeah, so if you follow the tracks through the rail yard, you'll eventually get to a bridge over the river that can be used to walk across to get to the tunnel. What does not work is on the opposite side of the river. So the side of the river where the tunnel actually is, there's a Cowie Tunnel Road, a lot of private drives and houses on the side of that mountain. It's a little dirt road. You go up there. That will not actually get you to the tunnel, so don't fall for that. Well, I mean, I guess it could if you were willing to park in somebody's driveway. Regardless, be prepared to walk. It is not something you can do with kids, despite my best efforts. So the Cowie Tunnel, it's haunted. It's allegedly. It's a site of tragedy. It's in Dillsboro. I told you we were going to get weird. So we've got UFOs. We've got hauntings. But now let's get to the Dillsboro vampires.
Yes. I love hauntings, and I love haunted train tunnels. And there's a lot about that story that it is a deep and serious tragedy. And there's a lot about that story that I love from the safety of a historical perspective. But I am so ready for vampires.
You're like, but I didn't come here for that. Did you enjoy your appetizer, sir? Are you ready for your entree? All right. Journey with me to the spring of 1788.
Yes.
A family with the surname Alfert moves to Dillsboro, North Carolina, with the patriarch setting up shop as a physician.
This is before Dillsboro existed, right?
Stop it with your critical thinking and let me tell the story about the vampire.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You mean all of this might not be true? All right, I'll put that away.
It is a super fun thing, though.
All right, so spring of 1788, a family with the surname Alfert moves to Dillsboro. The patriarch setting up shop as the town physician.
Mm-hmm.
They purchase land near the Tuckasegee River, which tracks because that's the river that runs through Dillsboro. And they had for the time, rather large house built. The house was large and stately so that the doctor could set aside a portion of the first floor as an office and an apothecary.
Okay.
The explanation that the townsfolk came up with for this affluence was that they had descended from royalty.
Ooh.
They were people of means.
Mm-hmm.
And they were happy to welcome people of means, education, and medical knowledge into the community. And things went well at first. It was standard, small town doctor practice, physician practice for the era.
Right.
Until two men in sequence who were attended to by Dr. Alfert for gout passed away unexpectedly and from unknown causes.
They both had gout.
Yes. That's what they allegedly saw him for.
Okay.
And then both of them died.
Oof.
These were well-liked. They were unnamed in all the accounts that I could find.
Mm-hmm.
Well-liked, productive members of the town, and their deaths were considered suspicious for their age and the state of their health.
Your gout doesn't kill people. Gout is uncomfortable.
The local minister, the parson, if you will,
mm-hmm.
immediately addresses the town and his congregation and squashes any sort of like ill speaking of the doctor of wrongdoing. Says, this is our doctor, and tomorrow is not promised to anyone. Need to chill with blaming the doctor for these two men dying. And townsfolk were like, all right. But then the townsfolk allegedly started reporting seeing a large bat-like creature flying about at night.
Okay.
And my mind immediately goes to, okay, well, how close is Bat Cave, North Carolina? Right?
Yeah.
The largest known granite fissure cave in North America that happens to house an insane amount of bats, and certain types of bats can get very large. It's only 60 miles east as the crow flies from this location. And, for me, I'm like, it could be reasonable that something large would live in that cave. I don't know. I was able to connect those dots in my head and make it work.
Yeah.
But I digress. So the townsfolk begin reporting seeing a large bat-like creature flying about at night. And later that fall is when things really took a turn. So the minister's wife went into their child's room and saw what she described as a dark figure hovering above their young daughter.
Ooh.
She screams out loud. The figure goes out the window, and the girl's dead.
Oh, dang.
No obvious signs of illness or injury. She had been in perfect health up until that point. She had 2 puncture wounds on her neck.
I mean, I don't love that this has happened, but I love this story.
So people start closing their doors, like total Eastern European village at the base of the castle vibes, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody's like shutting the doors at night and like huddling together in single rooms, and no one's going out. Everyone is scared. And a few nights after the girl died, a young boy came into town banging on his grandparents' door saying that something was attacking his mother and father, like up the hill. So the grandfather raises a posse really quick. And they run up the hill, and they found the boy's parents and sister dead.
Dang. This also has like big Salem's Lot vibes. Stephen King's Salem's Lot. That's a great novel.
Puncture wounds on the necks of all the corpses. They send out search parties into the hills. They're like, all right, we got to find this monster. So they scour the land. They find nothing. And then things get quiet until February of 1789, several months later. Residents are starting to relax. They're like, oh, I guess the monster left. Like, there haven't been any crazy deaths, and like, I guess we're okay. They were able to convince themselves that life was getting back to normal until screams were heard coming from a house in town. And when the neighbors arrived, they saw a dark figure in the shape of a human race from the home and into the home of the Alferts.
Oh, good grief. I don't know. Like, call me too cautious, but I feel like if you're a vampire, don't run straight back home.
Ah, can't see me. Blah, don't look at me. Blah.
Like, fly a few laps first, throw them off the track.
So the couple that was in the house were found to be dead. A mob forms, and they go to the Alfert house. They pound on the door. They demand to be let inside. Dr. Alfert refuses their entry. And after a short discussion, it was decided that men would stand outside the house, not allowing anyone to come or go until they could get more people. So by morning, they went from like a small mob to the whole town is there. Doctor comes out, tries to reason with them. They tie him to a tree.
Ooh.
So they tie him to the tree and then go into the house, and they find that the upstairs chambers, they look like normal bedrooms. Like, there's beds and end tables and all that, but it's obvious that the beds are not slept in, and Mrs. Alfert and young Alfert, the son, are nowhere to be found in the upper levels. They find a door through the apothecary into a basement, where they find 3 coffins.
Makes me so happy. Okay.
And in one of them was laying Mrs. Alfert, dressed all in black and very much cognizant of their presence. She hissed and cursed as she was pulled from the coffin. The 15-year-old son was nowhere to be found. So they hung the Alferts out front. They hung them, dragged the bodies back into the house, set the whole thing on fire.
Okay.
Son is never found. The attacks and deaths cease. That is the end of the legend of the Dillsboro vampires.
So vampire legends have changed a lot over time. Yes. And like the widespread cultural sort of take at any given time is different from another in terms of like, what are the weaknesses? How can they be defeated? Things like that. What causes them? All kinds of things. And vampire legends historically have tended to be highly localized. Like, there's in basically every culture worldwide, there is something like a vampire.
Yeah.
But they almost always have a different origin. They have some sort of different set of features as a monster. And I'm fascinated by the fact that in this one, apparently, the vampires can be hanged.
Yeah. I don't know. That is something that I found interesting. We're going to get into all that.
Okay. I say that because I don't think that would have any effect on like Lestat, or whatever.
Right. You're hurting my neck. Blah. You're wrinkling my nice blouse.
That would be very Lestat.
So if you look at the date that this was supposed to have occurred, this is smack dab in the middle of the New England vampire scare, which was actually just people dying of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Talk about localized explanations for vampires. Let's walk through a hypothetical situation where I get tuberculosis. I die. But in the process of me like running out the clock, I managed to give tuberculosis to everybody in my house, right? Because that's the way infectious diseases work. So I'm dead, and all of a sudden they start looking worse and worse and worse. Well, the belief or the suspicion would be at that time that I had been a vampire and I was draining their life energy from beyond my not quite dead grave.
Right.
So in New England, what they would do is they would exhume who they thought was the vampire and root around in the guts. Honestly, I mean, it's disgusting. They would root around in the guts, They'd be like, is there liquid blood present? Like, how decomposed is this person? And then they would burn the heart and like inhale the smoke and ash and stuff. All they were doing was spreading more tuberculosis.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
This dead person that died from this illness, let's root around in them.
Yeah. Like this is a comparison that I know we've discussed before, and plenty of people in the Carolinas will be familiar with this. When you burn poison ivy, you have to be really careful to not inhale the smoke. When you burn somebody with tuberculosis, you have to be really careful not to inhale the smoke for the same reason.
So it's interesting that like the time frame that's given is the exact same time as the vampire scare in New England, but the signs of the vampirism and weaknesses and the traits of the vampire are completely different, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to do with shape-shifting or drinking blood or biting or anything like that in the New England lore. So this is a fun story that I have a lot of problems with. Dillsboro wasn't a town. Jackson County wasn't even a county.
Yeah. There might have been people living in that place, but it wouldn't have been called Dillsboro at any rate.
Right. So knowing that, it was widely accepted as farm or wilderness at the time, how do you find the records? And I want to give a huge shout out to the Jackson County Genealogical Society.
Ooh, do tell.
Massive help with this. They produce an encyclopedic volume of records that go way back. These books that clued me into 1780s land records do exist. They were just kept by the Secretary of State in Raleigh, which makes sense, right? Yeah. So you have this like unincorporated place. Records still need to be kept. They kept them at the Capitol. So if you want stuff that old, you have to go through some of their records, and you can find land records for the area around the time. There's no Alfords anywhere. The Genealogical Society of Jackson County also includes records by surname for an absolutely staggering number of families, even going back to the 1780s. Like,
wow,
going way, 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 way back. They have records. No Alfords found anywhere. This story is, with very minor differences, cut and pasted all over the internet. There's a lot of contemporary vampire lore in there that, borrows a lot from Bram Stoker.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah.
A lot of the stories on the internet will say like, whoa, well, there was a poem written in the 1750s or something called like The Vampire. It's like a German poem. And they're citing that, well, that one mentions blood. So like, okay, cool. There is even a book by an author. I am not going to name the book, and I am not going to name the author, because it is a straight up cut and paste job from the internet with zero fact checking. And I don't want to give them any credit for anything, because this was published in 2020. I am going to get my soapbox out and I'm going to yell. I'm not going to like physically yell. I'm going to complain. If you like stories about the paranormal, if you like stories about the weird, you're not doing the scene a favor by cutting and pasting creepypasta into a book and trying to pass it off as a legitimate local legend.
Yeah, that's no good. Might as well just stick to writing fiction.
Yeah. Like, and that would be cool. That would be cool. Yeah. Like, I'm good with fiction. I love fiction. The thing is, I also love historical weird. And I don't like when people are so lazy that they don't fact check anything. They're like, oh, yeah, no, this happened. Because I found the source. I found the earliest source that I could find on this is from 2010.
Oh.
On a website called vampirerave.com, where people upload vampire stories.
Okay. Wow.
So somebody wrote a really good piece of fiction.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of knuckleheads started saying that it was some kind of ancient lore. Not ancient, 200-year-old lore. And
right. They started calling it historical.
Right. Like, oh, this is oral tradition and blah, 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 blah. No. This is from vampirerave.com.
Wow.
Also, there's a ghost tour in Dillsboro that will take your money and show you all the sites.
I bet they don't hurry to correct anything about this story.
The ghost tour one, I can almost let go. It's the publishing it in a book in 2020 as like true historical legend.
Yeah, that's not okay. When you sign up for a ghost tour, to some degree, what you're signing up for is an entertainment experience.
Yes.
And so, like, that's a part of the deal. You want to walk around and hear scary legends. But if you're looking for historical research, that's not what you do. If you're looking for entertainment, that is what you do. There's a difference between the two, and it's very important to maintain a line between them. We've talked about this many times between us. I'm not sure at this point if we'll have talked about it in the show, but the fact that wrapping up history in fiction only serves to separate people from the history. You know, it builds a barrier between people experiencing these really fascinating historical points that we otherwise can celebrate and enjoy.
I feel like Dillsboro is a wonderful town. They have plenty of, if you're into the types of topics that we cover, they have enough. You don't need to just make stuff up. You can certainly write a piece of fiction and set it in a town that you are fond of. That's great. But don't try to say like this is tradition, because it's not. You know, tradition would be memorializing and acknowledging the Cowie Tunnel disaster and saying like, and there's these haunts or haints, as some folks would say. You know what I mean? Like that is okay. But saying like, oh, there were these people and this was their name and this is where they lived during these years. Wikipedia will debunk you.
I don't have any idea what book you're talking about here, but it sounds like this is somebody who consciously chose either not to have a fact checker or to ignore them.
Anyway, people are going to mess around and make us write a book. That's what's going to happen. I'm going to read enough crap that I'm going to be like, you know what? No, I can do this better with better sources and more educational value than like, oh, there's a boogeyman in the woods.
Right.
Like,
I'm really glad you pointed out that this came to life originally as a story that was written as fiction on a website and published to be read and enjoyed as fiction, because had you not said that, I would have immediately plagiarized that person's work, because the whole time you were telling the story, like as you finished it up, I was thinking, okay, if I were writing this in a novel, which I definitely now want to do, then probably the son who disappears is the vampire. The parents are his minions. He's in the process of slowly turning the mother. That's why she's sleeping in the coffin in the daytime and hissing and stuff, but hanging works on her because she's still technically alive. Like I had this whole story ready to go about this like vampire kid trying to turn this town and doing a really lousy job of managing their vampire identity because they're a kid vampire. They don't think about things like maybe don't run directly back home when you get caught, stuff like that. I was ready to run with that. Like I was halfway to outlining it in my head. And now I'm really glad that I know that that's fiction, because if I had read this presented as nonfiction, I would have immediately stolen someone's work.
Treating his vampire spreading like a paper route.
Yeah, pretty much, you know, like, and I would have done this whole thing about like, he thinks that the daughter of the preacher is a pretty girl and et cetera, et cetera. And there's like a Romeo and Juliet story there, maybe. There are like so many possibilities, so many ways to run with this.
I mean, you still can like borrow the core ideas that you just said and not have it be anything to do with the Alfords or Dillsboro or.
Yeah, that's true. I actually kind of have that in a short story that's in an anthology that's out there anyway. I have the like the young woman's side of being approached by a boy who's a vampire. So,
hey girl, you want to be undead?
That was pretty much his offer, and she was like, "No thanks, I'm cool."
You want to feast on the living?
Like 300 years from now, somebody with a really intense understanding of the lingo of the 21st century is going to write a very spooky, historical sounding vampire who's very old timey, who talks like that.
I weep for the future.
Yep.
So anyway, that's Dillsboro Vampires. I like the story. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy the story for all the reasons that you just described. Like there's a lot that you could like unpack in your imagination there. I loathe the historical inaccuracies in it and the fact that it has been published in a collection of quasi-historical stories from the Carolinas.
Yeah, that's really gross. That's really bad. It's sloppy. I mean, like, It's almost even worse if it's unintentional, because it's so sloppy.
I mean, seriously, I didn't spend that much time on it in Dillsboro, to be honest. I went there and I had fun with my family. Like, it was just like a side thing of like, oh, let's just see if these records exist.
Yeah.
You don't even need to go there to do that.
And there are researchers out there and writers who write about this who are that responsible with their stuff. This is going to be very like anachronistic by the time this is published, but literally yesterday, I was reading a post on Facebook from Tally Johnson, who has been a guest on our show, about the fact that like he has reached the research point in a book he's working on of ghost stories set in South Carolina, or ghost stories from South Carolina, where he now needs to go do the site visits for each location to see if the accounts seem reasonable and feasible, based on like going there himself.
Somebody else that we've had on, the Wreak Havoc Productions guys, Carolina Hates, Dan, they delayed their book for fact checking.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what he told us when he came on as a guest. It was like, oh, well, we were going to do it, but, then quarantine and lockdown. So we couldn't really get to the sites like we needed to do it right. They just waited to do it right.
Yeah.
And actually, by the time this airs, their book should be coming out. So,
oh, cool.
Go check that out, I guess.
Yeah.
I haven't read it because I'm recording this months before it comes out, but I'm going to get it.
Yeah. Same with Tally's book. I can't have read it yet because it's not finished being written, but I bet it'll be really good.
So if you want examples of responsible storytellers, there's two.
It's just, I feel like I don't know. I like I said, I have no idea whose book this is or who wrote it or what, but my guess is it's probably the business model of, you churn out books that are just slapped together and you don't really worry about that stuff. And again, if what you want is the entertainment value, fantastic. If what you want is a history lesson, that's different.
So anyway, Dillsboro vampires, blah.
I really I want it to be true. I want so badly because like the mountains, and especially like really remote parts of the mountains like that, are so ripe for monster stories. Life there was so isolated. It was such a weird time and such a weird place. And I think that the combined history of the many peoples who have lived in that part of the state and have suffered tremendous tragedies at each other's hands over and over and over again. Like, it's just very rich fodder for fascinating stories. But that's what makes the history itself so valuable.
Well, that's it. Thanks for listening. Please give us a rating, unless you're the person whose book I just crapped on, in which case I don't want to hear from you.
I would be very surprised if they listened to us.
Yeah, I would be shocked if they did. Yeah. Anyway, happy spooky season. You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.